Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. And today I have a very special guest back on the podcast. She's on for the third time. The last time we had her on was Lindsay Parker. I forgot to actually introduce your name, aka Lifting Lindsay. This is her third time back on, and she was last on episode 186 and then episode 104. And that was actually back in the last one, episode 186, was actually September of 2022, and that was released. So it's been a little bit, so it's been a little while. But Lindsay, appreciate you coming back on the podcast. Just real quick, if you aren't familiar with Lindsay, she is a wife and mother of three. She also has a deep passion for learning and teaching. And lastly, she really loves lifting weights and fitness, and that's why we brought her on here. So Lindsay, welcome back on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited. I didn't realize this was the third time. For some reason, it's been so long, I feel like.
Is that less or more than you thought?
It's like, I thought it was just one other time. So this is exciting. Let's get into this. What more about?
Yep, number 3. And like I said, those last 2 episodes were awesome. I think we talked a little bit about body recomp the first time in episode 186. And then I think in 104, sorry, I'm scrolling down real quick, we talked about building phases for women. So all great topics there with that. So if you want to check those out. But yeah, so since it's been a little while since we've had you on, how's everything been going? Is there any updates? I'm sure there's been some things that are going on. I don't know if there's anything big that's happened in the last year and a half or so that you want to share or chat about from that perspective.
In the past few weeks, for those that have followed me on Instagram, I've been sharing my fertility story.
Yeah.
How many of your listeners care to know about that? And so I've been really open about us trying to get pregnant again. And so we've just found out we're 6 weeks pregnant. So
congrats.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting, which brings with it a whole set of other questions. People are really concerned, is lifting weights then going to cause a miscarriage? Don't lift weights. Or doctors saying, oh, don't lift anything over 20 pounds. And yeah, just that brings a whole other slew of, and I've been pregnant before and lifted all the way through. So anyways, it's just a fun new phase to go through and bring people along with that journey too. That no, you don't have to stop lifting weights. You can continue, and how it affects and influences the mother and baby. So that's probably the most exciting thing, is that we're pregnant. So, well, I'm pregnant. My husband's not. He's just over there enjoying himself. So
Yep. He's just along for the ride, right? Nothing changes for him right away.
Exactly. He has to deal with my emotional roller coaster. So I guess he does. He has his work cut out for him too.
Yep. I guess that kind of brings up a good topic in this. I did want to talk about your training and what that kind of looked like. So I guess for you, what is that gonna look like? And with you trying to get pregnant and everything, did that change anything? I'm just curious. I'm sure the audience would be curious to hear about those things.
Yeah. So it actually didn't change anything. So even there was 1 week that after we did because I get my children through IVF. So after the transfer of the embryo, there was a few days where they were like, take it easy. But it was even really interesting. 10 years ago when I did an IVF, my doctor was like, the general rule was you stop all weightlifting. You have 2 days where you just lay in bed. You can't even get up and move really. And I remember talking to my doctor about it with my last transfer, which was not this one, but the last one, which was like, 5 years ago. And I said, do I really have to do this? And he's, look, you are a really active person. To be honest, really the only reason we tell women to take it easy there's no quality studies showing that by lifting weights, you're going to cause a miscarriage. Is it the reason why we tell women to calm down is actually because we want them not to stress out. And if they do have a miscarriage, we want them to think that there was nothing that they did that caused it. So it's really interesting because like the one study that has been used on women to tell them not to lift anything over 20 pounds, or it's going to increase the rate or increase the risk of having a miscarriage. The one study was looking at women in the workplace who were moving and doing a lot over an 8-hour period. So that's not the same thing. And the way that they're moving, lifting boxes and carrying is very different than what you do for an hour in the gym. So I've had 5 miscarriages, and 3 of those were before I even was into weights or lifting. And I still had that high rate. 2 of them those were after I had been into lifting. And my miscarriages are due to my egg quality. I already know that from doing in vitro. So for me, it didn't change. It doesn't change anything. I'm not at a high risk of miscarrying due to lifting weights. It's a genetic thing. So the worst thing I could do would be to stop lifting weights. Like, you want to kill me mentally? Tell me to stop lifting weights. You want to see my cortisol levels go up? Tell me to stop lifting weights. And even talking to my doctor, he's just, no, you're fine. Get in there, enjoy, have fun, don't stop anything. So it's been interesting because I've had doctors tell me to not lift. I've had other doctors who are a little bit more educated and stay up to date, didn't get their degree 60 years ago and then didn't stop learning, right? They've kept up to date and they're like, no, you have been doing this all along. We're not going to stop doing what your body's pretty much already adapted to. You can continue on. It's going to be just fine. So with Link, my last son, the day before I gave birth, I hit a PR.
That's awesome.
And it was so fun and it was so empowering. And once again, though, just quickly, I'm somebody who I'm experienced lifting, and not only do I have a lot of experience in it, but my background of biomechanics, I know how to lift.
Yep.
So I can read my body. I know. So when you get pregnant, there's this hormone that's released called relaxin, and it does exactly that. It
Relax.
relaxes. Yeah, your pelvis bones and everything, and they start to expand. And so when women are doing some unilateral movements and they already struggle with maybe a split squat and stability and everything with that, then doing that during pregnancy may be a bad thing for them. But somebody experienced, knowing what they're doing, being able to control the movement really well, what they change during pregnancy will be totally different than an inexperienced individual. And so that's what everybody needs to remember moving forward, is that what you change during pregnancy depends on your body's ability to recover, and then also just your body's ability to manage the load well. So manage it under a lot of attention, being able to create a lot of internal stability, and that just comes down to the individual.
Yeah. And so it sounds like kind of your experience going into it's going to be super important. My understanding of it is, hey, if you haven't really done a ton of exercise, you probably don't want to all of a sudden go all in on it when you're pregnant, right? You probably want to maybe ease into it. Or I know sometimes the advice is, again, if you haven't been doing it before, maybe again, ease into it there if that's, but the takeaway though is, hey, still train. For you specifically, it's like you said, if you're not training mentally, you're going to not, let's just, like you said, some spike your cortisol, you're not going to feel great. And stress is definitely, I'm sure, something that is not going to be great for you and the baby and everything like that. And that's a great way to manage it during this period of time. So like you said, keep lifting. It's super important. Off of that, I know the kind of first trimesters, typically you're a little bit more fatigued, things like that. Is that something that you have experienced? Do you alter your training around that, auto regulate it, or what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, so every pregnancy is so different, right? So I can really only compare the last 2 pregnancies because these are the ones where I've been a trained individual moving into pregnancy. But I'm also only 6 weeks along right now. So I feel nauseous daily, but it's nothing that actually, the thing that helps me when I feel nauseous is moving. So laying in bed because I feel nauseous actually makes it worse. So if I can start moving, I'll even get on I always call it a walker, but it's not a walker.
Walking pad or something.
A walking pad, yes. My husband, you're not a grandma. You don't have a walker yet, Lindsay. But I'll get on my walking pad and move, and that really helps. But my last pregnancy, and my energy levels are down a little bit, but not bad by any stretch of the imagination. Usually around 12 weeks, from 12 to 18 weeks is when typically women get, and it just varies, but typically women feel really sick, are unmotivated. Now, I can tell you from experience, not just myself, but with clients, because I have taken women through their whole pregnancy, and the best thing for them is get into the gym. Like, it is so crazy how they will wake up feeling like crap, like they don't want to move. And if they just get to the gym and start moving, they feel so much better. They have way higher energy levels for the rest of the day. So I'm not getting into the gym being pregnant, trying to have some look. That look goes away during pregnancy. But if I can get in, it makes me feel better, and I can maintain muscle mass during the pregnancy, which I think is really important. Another thing that's really important, and for a while they thought, don't work out when you're pregnant, because as you're going through your movements and your heart rate skyrockets, goes way up, the baby's does too. And you don't want to add any stress to the baby. But what they've found over time is actually that slight increase in stress on the baby actually helps the baby manage delivery better. So their own stress levels have shown to be reduced and handle delivery, because during that time, you're going to see the baby's heart rate go up, go down. And so that's another thing, is this is not just about, and there are studies showing what mothers who stay as active as they can during pregnancy, the positive effects that it has on birthing to the mother and child. And also, there are some really interesting continued health benefits that they've traced in the child's own life. So it's like you're setting yourself up, you're setting your baby up to be a healthier person. It is the coolest thing in the world. So during pregnancy, I'm not going to the gym because I think I want to keep obviously, you're not going to keep your six pack. Like, it's just not going to happen. You're not keeping the quote unquote look. But I go because, one, I'm addicted to feeling strong. Two, I know the best thing I can do for my baby is stay as healthy as possible during my pregnancy. The best thing I can do for myself, stay as healthy as possible during that pregnancy. And then it's been remarkable having, delivering, and even the nurses afterwards being like, I have never seen somebody recover as quickly. Like, I've never seen somebody's uterus go down as fast. And so it is just the coolest thing ever. And there's a huge difference between a woman staying quote unquote active by just walking versus a woman staying active in lifting weights during pregnancy. So that's just something, do what you can though. I'm not trying to guilt anybody. You do you, I'm going to do me, right? But I do want to encourage people that you're strong, you can do this. And another thing that a funny little thing that I don't think most people realize is that medical textbooks for years and years, this was only changed recently within the last 5 to 10 years. Pregnancy was considered a handicap. It was literally under a handicap. That's how little doctors have known about women's capabilities during pregnancy. We're not handicapped. This is a beautiful time where we get to continue to stay as healthy as possible, strong as possible, and grow a child at the same time. That's pretty amazing. That's pretty cool. So
yeah, No, that is super cool. And yeah, I was gonna ask you, what are your like goals like during this period of time? And you hit on it, right? It's not like you're like gonna go for any type of look. It sounds like it's more so again the mental health side of things, managing stress, and then also like staying strong. Is there anything else that you are trying to focus on during this period of time from a training perspective, or are those pretty much it there with?
That's pretty much it. The another question that I get a lot though is, are you going to keep tracking or should I keep losing weight during pregnancy? I'm like, oh geez. Look, guys, like to what end? Like you're going to put on some weight, even if like your energy balance changes a little bit. The needs of you and the baby change a little bit. Body fat distribution actually changes. Women who may never be able to put body fat on their butt or lower legs will all of a sudden find that during pregnancy, that's where it goes. I remember when my sister was pregnant and my two little nieces, they're just these little girls. They were like, I thought the baby was growing in your belly, mom. So why is your butt getting so big?
That's hilarious.
That's just like what happens. But it is interesting. The body just changes. The best thing a woman can do if they are obese, if they are in an obese category, their doctor's going to tell them and strongly encourage, like, even during this pregnancy, let's try to rein things in. Because a calorie deficit to somebody who is obese during pregnancy is not going to hurt and harm the baby because they're carrying around energy availability towards that for that baby. And so I've actually taken women through pregnancies where they've lost 50 pounds. At the end of the pregnancy, they weighed less than when they first got pregnant. They were way healthier and stronger, and they have a healthy baby. So when somebody is obese, leaning towards unhealthy body fat percentages, that's something that I'm like, yeah, we can get you healthier during this pregnancy. If somebody's in a healthy body fat percentage, I always have to question their why. Like, why are you trying to be in a fat loss phase right now?
Yeah.
I'm more concerned about where you are mentally versus physically. So I think we need to address some inner things, and there needs to be some degree of acceptance. But no, let's not try to lean down during pregnancy. Like the main priority is creating a life. So I always tell women, don't do that. Another thing is I don't track 24/7 anyways. Like I use tracking for fat loss, but I have nailed down mindful eating approaches. I have courses on teaching other people mindful eating. That's where most people thrive anyways. And so I'm going to continue doing that during the pregnancy. But I will keep a mental note about protein because protein needs actually increase a little bit during pregnancy because you want to maintain your muscle, but you also want to build a new child being.
Yep.
So they do go up a little bit, which is hard because we also have an adverse that we don't want protein. So my protein supplements do increase a little bit during the first trimester. And then after that, usually for me, I can go back to my normal eating more whole foods.
Or do you maybe let's say, I don't know what this looks like for you. I'm sure it's pretty much probably mostly whole food focus, but do you increase maybe like the calorie density of some foods from time to time, or is it you still try to stick relatively to mostly whole foods and stuff like that throughout?
Yeah. Yeah. I stick to my usual routines while I can. It's interesting because our calorie needs don't really increase during the first trimester. So women often will be like, awesome, I can just eat whatever. I'm feeding two now. I'm like,
Yep.
that baby is literally the size of a poppy seed. Like you don't need 1,000 more calories for it. So you can look at that in a few different ways. That's just finally somebody finding food freedom. They are just like, now there's an excuse, a reason why I can binge because I've lived in such an restricted state of mind for so long. So that's an interesting, that's not a good, healthy way of thinking. Not much changes until about the second trimester. And then calorie needs start going up. What's great though is typically with the second trimester, energy levels start going up too. So it's kind of calorie needs, energy needs go up, and it makes it easier to maintain during that period. The first trimester is usually when women have a lot of, what is it called? They just really want certain foods, and weird foods and food aversions and all of that. So it honestly is that first trimester, if you can just get through it. But for me, I already have this lifestyle of health set up, so nothing really changes too much. And that might be hard for some women to hear, but I think if you haven't built a good solid lifestyle, then that's when most people crash and gain a ton of weight, excessive weight, that maybe they don't need to. But if they had spent a long time building up a good, healthy food culture and lifestyle, then the crash would be mitigated a bit, I feel like.
Yeah, it makes everything a lot easier. Same thing with what we talked about initially with the training too, right? If you're in a good spot there with that, it makes things a lot easier during that period of time too. So for you then, will you follow like any sort of program or anything? Will you have a set amount of days, or is it just going to be based on how you feel and everything like that throughout?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I have a training app that actually has my personal program on it, so people can follow along with my programming. And usually I lift 5 days a week. And I've had no problem continuing with that. Things could change, but I'm still going to keep writing that same 5-day program. But usually in the third trimester is actually when my recoverability goes down
Mm.
and kind of plummets. And that's usually when I start pulling back to about 3 times a week training. So I'll probably continue to write the 5-day, but then I'll also have, this is actually like the Lindsay's pregnancy 3 days a week training that I'm following, if anybody wants to follow that one. But even that's hard. I've had women ask me like, "Are you gonna write a pregnancy program?" And I'm like, "You know what? That's so hard for the reasons that I've listed,
Yep.
is it's so hard because I'm advanced, like, nothing changed much the last time I was pregnant. Literally nothing really changed except for I wasn't doing dedicated core work. But I would tell women, because everybody's different, anything that's going to, one, they've got to learn how to breathe better during training, because if they don't, if they're holding their breath a lot, it can actually bear down on their pelvic floor. That can cause issues during and post pregnancy. So when we are holding our breath during the whole squat, that's going to be something that can just bear down and cause issues, prolapse. Women walk away from pregnancy and are like, I pee every once in a while, or I can't lift without peeing. And a
Yep.
lot of that can be actually solved by learning how to brace and breathe better during movements. At the bottom of a squat, actually, during and post pregnancy, you should be breathing out and then come all the way up. Where typically with squatting, if I'm telling somebody how to breathe, at the top, you take a deep breath and you move down and then you push up, and it's almost like halfway up is when you breathe out. But for women, it's going to be no, at the very bottom, you breathe out and then push up at the same time. So there are some things like that they need to. I was working with a woman who was doing leg raises, and she said, "Why do I feel the need to pee during leg raises?" And I'm like, and she sent me a video, and I was like, "Did you even take a breath
That's
during
amazing.
any of that?" Like, you were breathing and bearing down and pushing. Yeah, of course. You need to learn to breathe better. So we worked on her breathing, and she's like, "Wow, like I didn't need to pee." Or even some doming can make issues worse for women with DR. And so it's, if you can learn how to breathe and brace better, that's going to really help. So honestly, any pregnancy program I would write in the future would actually be more about teaching people how to breathe and brace
Mm.
better during training, versus telling them this exercise you can't do, this one is safe. There's actually no safe for diastasis and for pelvic floor. There's no safe and unsafe per se. There's just, how are you performing the exercise?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, no,
So
that's No, that's a good point you bring up. There's not any exercise that, like you said, you can or can't do. It's just all about how you perform it. And like you said, breathing is going to be super important. That's something that many people overlook there with that, which can make any exercise much better for them to do. So I guess then to wrap up this part of the talk, let's fast forward. What does that kind of couple weeks, months after the baby's born, what does that look like for you? Is it just get in what you can, or how have you typically managed that period of time in the past?
I love that you asked that because with my last baby, I jumped into training too quickly.
Okay.
I remember after like 3 weeks, I'm like, "I can't handle this anymore. I'll just go down. I'll do some body weights because I feel really good." And I started doing some body weights at 3 weeks, and my body was just like, "Nope, you are not ready." And I could feel it very quickly. And so I stopped, and then I waited another week, and then I tried it again, and it was like, okay, I can do some upper body at this point, and I can start incorporating more. Most doctors are like, wait 6 weeks, right? And it was probably about 5 weeks when I could start doing lower body again. And I didn't how I approached it, it was actually very similar to how I would work with anybody who's been out for a while and then came back in. Either years of just they weren't making it to the gym or there was an injury or whatnot. I actually started with 3 weeks, or excuse me, 3 times a week, and it was just a little full body, and it was mostly pump work. Because after 6 weeks of not lifting, glycogen stores are depleted. There's not like I really wanted to get a pump, get nutrient partitioning. So I started doing pump work. And when I tell people, like, it's referred to as AMPK or pump work, but what it is basically, you can do 4 to 6 sets. That sounds pretty high, but it's really fast. 4 to 6 sets, and it's 8 to 12 reps, and then it's only a 30-second rest between. And you don't choose lengthened positions because you're going to get excessive DOMs if you do that. So if you choose short contracted positions and do that type of, maybe a glute bridge would be like that short and contracted position. You do 5 to 6 sets, 8 to 12 reps, and you're only hitting failure on the last, and you're going to notice a nice pump with that type of low rest period work, right? Obviously, you're not going to be able to do as much weight either, but that's okay. The point is not strength right now. We're just doing some pump work, and then I'm eating carbs so that I can drive those carbs right into the muscle. And that's actually, that type of programming is usually what I do for people when they haven't been lifting for a while. Let's just get you in, because it's actually relatively low DOMs because you're working in that short contracted position. You're not doing as much heavy weight and all of that. So we can avoid excessive DOMs and we can help fill them up. And usually they notice it right away. They're like, oh, like my delts are popping or my biceps or my booty during the workout. So that's usually how I come back. And so I do that for a few weeks, and then I move back into, okay, let's start doing my usual heavier weights, but maybe I'm staying away from failure. I'm not taking the last set to failure like I usually like to do. And then I slowly move back into that type of hypertrophy program that I was doing before.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's awesome. So start with kind of the, like you said, more pump style, like training for the first little bit, get, like you said, get that pump back. That always feels good. It's always motivating to see that, and then transition more to more hypertrophy style. But like you said, it's important to be in that short position as often as you can, just because otherwise you'll get excessively sore, right? Especially if you haven't trained for, I'm sure at that point, I think you said you're at like 4 or 5 weeks. So you're talking, it's been a
Yeah.
little while. You're very primed to get very sore during that period of time.
Yes, very much.
Cool. Yeah, no, I think that was a really cool conversation to just sum up what you're going to do during pregnancy and then afterwards there with that. So again, congratulations. That's awesome. So let's dive into the topics. And you talked about training to failure. So that's what I want to start with. Some of these topics is training to failure. I think how we can start this is, I guess, maybe what are your kind of viewpoints on training to failure? And then we can talk about what it looks like, how to gauge, and the importance of training to failure.
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts on this. You can totally interrupt me, by the way, if you're like,
Yep.
"Lindsay, we're talking way too much." Let's talk about that point you just said. But I have a lot of thoughts about the whole training to failure thing because there's usually two camps. There's the camp of studies have shown that you don't need to train to failure for hypertrophy, and that's what we're specifically talking about here, okay?
Yep.
Because there's a difference between strength and hypertrophy. We can write programs for both, but I'm not talking about like powerlifting type of strength. There's these two camps within hypertrophy and they're extremes that I feel like people lean towards, right? They're like, you don't ever have to go to failure to make gains. Studies have shown that. So I'm never going to go to failure. And then you have this other side that's no, you have to go to failure every set to failure. And the thing about it is both sides can point to any one study to prove their point. So I'm just going to outline a little of the messiness of these studies though. Because anybody who spends a lot of time reading studies knows that studies seldom give like 100% complete answer. In fact, a lot of times they'll give some guidance, but a lot of times we get more questions from, at least I do. I'm like, oh, but what if they had done it this way? And did they track that? And were they going to fail? Let me dive into this. So we have a few issues with the failure studies that we have. One, what is the definition of failure? So oftentimes people will just say they train to failure. What did they define that as, right? Because everybody has different definitions. So these studies have different definitions and they tracked it differently. Two, was it on a trained or untrained group? Three, was it done in an actual gym with the researchers right there, right? So was the lab like a gym, researchers there showing them, pushing them to failure? Did they hit failure and then some researchers would then consider real failure them to go one more rep with the researchers' help, right? So there's this whole dynamic of, did they even know where failure was? Were the researchers there pushing them? Were they just told, measure it yourself and go to the gym? Like there's all of these little things. And then it's, oh, but was it high volume or low volume? Because 90% of those studies were actually done on people who were only training 2 to 3 times a week. Jeff, how many times do you train a week? Is it 2?
Yeah, not 2.
Yeah. How many times? Is it like 4 or 5?
5. I do 5 currently, yeah.
Yeah. Most people who want hypertrophy, we want volume, right? We're pushing 5 to 6 times a week. And so it's okay, so you're taking half the amount of volume that you usually do, Jeff, in these studies. That doesn't really apply to you because you're not doing half the volume. You're doing double the volume. So does that matter to you? What does that mean for you, kind of thing? So that's why I say truth is always found somewhere in the middle of the extremes. You can't say like that every single person has to take every single set to failure or they're not seeing gains. You can't say that nobody should ever go to failure or they're going to impede their gains if they do, right? The truth is found somewhere in the middle. Like you have to take into account, does the person even know where failure is? Like I love bringing this up because there's another study that was done on how well can people even gauge technical failure, let's call it that, or form failure. How can they, like, how well do people gauge that? And what they've found is experienced lifters, they're stopping 20 to 50% shy of failure. That's shocking. And I had an experience last year. I held a biomechanics course. So it was an in-person course. It was just one day at the gym with me, going over anatomy and then movements in the gym. And I'm wanted to test this theory out, so I picked something brutal. We did Bulgarian split squats,
Oof.
but I even made it more brutal, and I made them elevate their front heel too. So this is like
Man.
killer quad, killer glutes. This is like everything, quad and back and front. Like this is just like lower body destroyer. So I chose that and I told them, find the weight that would be 10 to 12 reps, no more than 12 reps, where you would be hitting failure in between 10 to 12. So I let them mess around, do some sets, and then they're like, okay, this is the weight. I'll be able to hit failure at 12. And I did this with 4 women, and on average, they did double. When I was standing right there, so alone, they thought they found this weight. And then I came over, watched them do 12, and I said, no, you're like, keep going. So it's like 12, 15, 18. I remember one girl hit 24. And I said, why did you think that weight was failure? And she's, because this is usually what I do in the gym. So I'm like, oh my gosh. So I actually think that nobody's not getting gains because they are hitting failure too much. I'm sorry. Like, it's just not happening. In my experience, most people don't even know where failure is. So that does lean towards the idea of, okay, maybe it is important then that we do keep a good gauge on where failure is. And how can we keep that gauge if we're never going to failure? So I think it's important to maybe just take one of the lifts that you really want to see growth in, then just your last set, take that one to failure. So you always have a really good gauge of where that is for you. So I don't take every set to failure, but I do usually take about 1 on really important lifts. But I do want to revisit these studies were done on people doing like lower volume, like half the volume that most bodybuilder or hypertrophy people who want muscle do. So there's just my guidelines that I tell people often is, look, if you're doing low to moderate volume, which is what those people were doing, then we've got to make that as effective as possible.
Yeah.
So you're sitting way closer to failure. And like I said, it's really good to just make sure that at least 1 is failure. If you're doing really high volume, then you're probably going to be safer. You wouldn't high volume plus every set to failure. I don't think anybody's really doing that. So higher volume, you can stay a little bit more away from failure. But it's still really good once in a while to tap into that where is failure. So I know I'm actually like sitting away from it or sitting close, wherever you want to be. So those are my thoughts. They're not inciting. I'm not getting people angry at each other. I'm not telling people they're stupid and wrong. I'm just saying there's a lot of elements that we need to consider. And when you consider all of them, we probably want to find a sweet spot somewhere in the middle. It's actually more dependent on like your volume that you're training with weekly.
Yeah, no, I think you summed that up perfectly, right? It's what is even failure training? What is the definition of it? That's super important. And then, like you said, within the studies, it's what does that look like? What's the population? Like these are all important things. And I don't know if this is something you commonly see with this, but I also feel like it's this debate around failure and non-failure. It's like the thought process is, oh, failure training is super challenging, non-failure training is super easy. And it's like, again, you're in that middle. Is that something that you commonly see thrown out there too?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point because some people do take things to the extreme like that, where they either think the non-failure people aren't working hard, or the non-failure people may actually not be working hard because they were told that they didn't have to and they could still get gains. So there's some fault on both sides. It is the same as when I tell people, it's always hard, these words like low weight, high weight. It actually doesn't matter. Low rep, high rep, it doesn't matter as long as you're getting near failure. Okay, but you didn't really give any sort of range. What's high rep? 50 reps, right? What's low rep? 4? So those words mean different things to different people. So people will come to me and be like, I'm doing low weight because I was told that I didn't need to do high weight. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. What's that mean? Define low weights, define high weights. Like, and so I'm always that person who's like, when people ask me a question, can I get away with low reps? Define low reps. So in fact, I say that so much that my children now, when I'm arguing with them, they'll be like, define clean.
That's a good point though, because that really does make a big difference, right? Because like you said, is high reps, is that 50 reps or is it 15? Because that's a big difference there. So definitely defining that is going to be super important. I'm sure too, then I think another thing that's I'm sure going to impact these things is going to be like exercise selection too, right? So again, to throw another kind of wrench in this, it's not necessarily just you should train to failure, you shouldn't. It's also like the exercise that you're choosing too. So I don't know if does that ever like factor into this for you, or is that something that again you're just like, I don't think it's overly important to worry about that.
Oh, it's 100% important because the amount of fatigue that somebody's going to accumulate can actually depend on the exercise, right? So are we loading the spine? So that's going to totally high volume for a glute bridge is going to be way more sustainable, if you will, to be able to do for long periods of time versus really high volume doing squats where you're loading the spine. So now there's so much more that needs to recover. You're getting into a lengthened position. More damage is going to happen there versus just working in the short and contracted position. So that is going to change. That's going to change everything. There's a lot of argument too about we're now seeing that more hypertrophy happens when we work in lengthened positions. Something that I felt like a lot of us intuitively were grasping that for a really long time now. And now we're finally seeing research. It's always validating when research comes out like that. Yes, we were right. But does that mean that the short contracted position is just useless? No, actually, if you look at studies really closely, the same amount of growth can happen, but maybe we just need to do more volume in those short contracted positions, right? So exercise selection will definitely impact the amount of sets, even the rest period that I'll choose for clients between, and the amount of work that we're doing.
Yeah, you're right. So again, another thing to throw into this is the exercise selection is going to failure on a leg extension versus back squat is going to be completely different and whatnot there with that. What about like the rep range too? I know we hit on this like high weight, low weight. That's something that would impact your decision making around that too, like the rep range that we're working in? Or would you say maybe something like exercise selection is probably a little bit more important than the exact rep range that you're working in?
Yeah, I would say exercise selection is a little bit more important because we are seeing that as long as we're getting close to failure, that people are going to grow, whether they're doing 15 to 20 reps versus the typical 8 to 12. Now, the reason why I would choose maybe 8 to 12 versus 15 to 20 would probably be the goals of the individual. Does the person really want to work on strength? Then you're going to choose the lower rep range, right? Versus the higher. So I wouldn't necessarily think about the rep ranges so much in regard to failure. I would be thinking more about the exercise selection, right? And a lot of times people can just destroy their clients by choosing 3 lengthened exercises for one muscle in one training day. And I'm like, you're going to destroy them if they work hard. If they don't work hard, it might just be a fun day for them. But if they really work hard, you do 3 lengthened, you're having them train all of those sets near failure, you're going to destroy them. Recovery is going to take a lot longer. They may have enjoyed it, but there's a smarter way. Why not just choose like maybe one lengthened, and then 2 mid-short, where we're not going to get as much fatigue. It's not going to tap in too much recovery. And then we can there's also benefits in working the short position. When we're thinking of just like overall joint health, it's really important that we work both extremes. So just because we're seeing a lot of research saying, oh, work more in the lengthened position and just stay in that lengthened position, there are still benefits to working in the short contracted.
Yeah, I feel like where things have maybe the pendulum, as with everything in fitness, it's like the pendulum just swings super far in one direction. So then it's, oh, just do the lengthen. But as you mentioned, there are some benefits of training in the shortened position as well, too. But I like that you mentioned that, hey, like the rep range isn't necessarily as important. It's more so, again, the exercise selection is going to be the most important thing there. What about this kind of like thought process of, okay, somebody here is training to failure. And I feel like, again, maybe this is something that you commonly see, but it's just, oh, okay, so then they end up like training to failure, but it ends up being more like systemic failure versus like actual muscular failure. Is that something you commonly see there? And maybe how do you help people maybe work through that? And again, talking about maybe how it does impact this whole kind of talk here of failure, training to failure and whatnot.
That's a really good point, because if you choose a hack squat, let's just say somebody is not very especially zero cardiovascular adaptations kind of thing, and you choose a hack squat and you're like, well, it doesn't matter the rep range, so I'm going to tell them to do 20 reps. I'm like, but is that failure going to be more the actual muscle we're trying to, is failure going to be more about fatiguing at a local level or at a systemic? I would say that especially men, that's going to be systemic. That is going to be a cardiovascular workout for them in so many ways. So yeah, that is a really good point, that we do need to think about how trained is the person in hypertrophy. Have they also been doing cardio, or are their lungs gonna go out before their actual muscle kind of thing, or just feeling some systemic fatigue? So that's a really good point. Yeah, that is something that I would consider. To be honest, I don't program a whole lot of 15 to 20 reps though. That's just not per se my style. So I usually am sitting closer to 8 to 12. If I'm working with somebody who has a lot of muscle tissue, like a male with a lot of muscle tissue, or even females who are like maybe came from more of a powerlifting background, and have a lot more muscle, I may even lower theirs to 6. 6 to 8 might be their sweet spot that they enjoy. And that's probably what I would do.
Yeah, just because I feel probably the main challenge of training to muscular failure is also like maintaining that technique and focus and stuff as you get closer to it. And I feel like that's probably where most people end up failing and missing out on this. And so I just didn't know if that was something you commonly saw, or if there was anything you did to help people work through that and understand that, hey, like that is the important part, right? It's not necessarily just like pushing to failure in terms of, okay, yeah, you can get the weight from point A to point B, but obviously your execution during that period of time is super important during that too.
Yeah. And I actually think that I hesitate even bringing this up because I don't remember the study that well. But I believe that there was a study showing it was harder to gauge fatigue, the local level, with higher reps too. So once again, if somebody's struggling gauging fatigue, it might be better to bring them down to an 8 to 12. Not that's a magic sweet spot. A lot of my clients really enjoy the 12 to 15 range. That's usually where I'm going to be sitting.
So just to go off that, so I know based on kind of the RIR research there, it's like people that, again, when you train in those like higher rep ranges, like again, what is that, like 12 to 15 plus, it's tougher to gauge failure when you get there, right? It also sucks, but then also like lower body too, right? People are generally like, they underestimate they're doing lower body. So like those kind of combinations. So if you're somebody that does like high rep, like leg training, you might be a little bit further off than what you think there. So you are right on that. I think that's what you were talking about there with that.
Yeah.
So
It's harder to gauge.
and that's where you see a lot of people, I feel like, train and going for that pump and burn there. And again, that can be a little bit tougher to gauge it there. What about, so like in general, I know you train a lot of women. Is this something that you see women typically get wrong here? Or is that a kind of a common issue with this? Is that something that you find you generally have to push women to get to this point a little bit more often? Or
it just depends on personality. It really does. So I would actually say it's the same as with men, right? If usually women who come to me with an athletic background, it's like they know how to grind. They know how to push themselves. And it's me and my husband were talking about this because he also does some coaching. And so we're like, yeah, honestly, we see the same exact thing. It's just that for so long, there have been more men dominating the bodybuilding scene. And we just think they know how to grind a little bit better and get in there, work really hard. They know how to choose heavier weights and hit the right rep scheme or whatever. And women will go in and they'll do the classes. They'll do these classes that taught them like, oh, we've got to be doing 25 plus reps and just go because of cardio. So I just think that it's been a cultural thing just because they've chosen different methods of classes versus training. But as I see more women loving weightlifting, learning about it, learning about strength training, I feel like a lot of that's going to go away and it's just a personality thing. It's that and another thing too, I do feel like with the personality thing that I do see a lot in women is some of them are afraid to push to failure because they need to know that they have the like perfect form. So before they can work hard, they need to know that they have perfect form. Where from what I've seen of men, and this is just me generalizing, they tend to be more okay going in and being messy.
Yep.
Does that make sense? Does that resonate?
Oh, 100%.
They're okay going in and it's just like they have more of okay, so I this is totally off topic, but I study they call it masculine energy and feminine energy, which is actually an incorrect name, and I like it better when people refer to it as yin and yang because it oftentimes people hear feminine energy and they think women, but it's not. The energies are not based off of gender or sex. It's just like what somebody may lean to a little bit more. So I see just women going in and just being a little bit more like, I have to be perfect. I have to show up this certain way. And it's just this energy that they may bring that's a little bit more like that. But I have other women that come in, and I would actually say I have more masculine energy to me. And they come in, and if you've ever seen my husband, he weighs like 250 pounds, huge guy, but like we joke about how he's feminine energy and I'm masculine energy, but I'm like half his size. But anyways, so I'll see women come in. They tend to have a more feminine energy. They're a little bit more timid, more cautious, need to make sure that right where the masculine energy comes in a little bit more driven, get it done, just do it, get out. It can be sloppy, it can be messy, just bring in the energy. That's what I see. But anyways, that was a long, weird tangent.
No, I agree, 100%, right? Like you said, women typically they're a little bit more like they need to, like you said, make sure their form's perfect before they do anything, which I think it has its pros and cons of that. And then same thing on the other end of the spectrum where it's some guys are just like, let's just go. And again, like you said, you'll get women and men that they cross paths in that too, where it's the same thing,
Yeah.
right? So it's just we're just generalizing here, but they focus a little bit too much on just trying to add weight and then they lose technique. So have you found like a good kind of balance to help people kind of balance that out and stuff? Or is it just reviewing form videos, stuff like that?
So I love doing form videos. For anybody who follows me, they know it. I've been thinking about this a lot, that in some ways I think form videos harm people. And I've been considering that a lot lately because it's like this balance of I want to teach them good form, but I want to do it in so that they can make them like get the most out of the exercise and movement. If somebody just wants to work out and they just want to go in the gym and throw weights, I don't care how they're throwing them. But if somebody is, I have a goal of hypertrophy, then I'm like, okay, then form matters a little bit more for you. But sometimes because women tend to want to really get it perfect before they push into pushing towards failure and really moving forward, then sometimes that shoots them in the foot because they're so obsessive with it. and they'll send me videos. So on my app, people can send me form videos and I review them and I'm like, everything looks great. There's so much doubt that you're creating in your mind and so much desire to do it perfect that I actually think that's harming you more than actually doing good. Like today or yesterday, I posted a form video on dumbbell lat rows and sometimes how people will exceed the active range of the lat and how that can take tension off of the lat. And so you just want to stay within the certain range, which is true. And I think it's really important. But a lot of times people will get so obsessive about those and nitpick at that they'll be like, that they won't push themselves. So it's this obsession with perfection. So they don't push hard. So they're actually doing exactly what they didn't want to happen, which is not get the desired results. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So then there's these other people who go in, they have sloppier form, but they have intensity at this crazy level, which almost makes up for the bad form. Plus, you don't know what drugs they're taking. And so it's like they're getting, not always, but sometimes. So they're getting the results that the other person who obsessed wanted to get, but isn't because they're not pushing themselves. So there's this fine line that I've actually been thinking of is how can I teach that? How can I say you're doing fine, but if you want to maybe refine things a little bit more, then let's make this tweak, right? But then that's also hard because on Instagram that doesn't sell. Being like, "Hey, you're doing fine," but
Right.
what sells is like, "Your lift sucks.
You
Let me
suck.
help you make it better," right?
Everything's wrong.
Yes, your whole life is wrong. Everything.
I feel like too, and we've both been lifting for a while. I feel like this is something that I feel like maybe people do try to get this too perfect right off the bat, and it's just going to be a lifelong kind of thing where you're always walking that fine line, and you're maybe sometimes you maybe fall too far on one side, and then you have to bring it back, and then you fall too far on the other side, and you have to bring it back. I personally find myself doing that where maybe there's periods of time where I'm overly focused on form and then I don't push it. And then I'm like, okay, I need to push it. But then I take that too far and I'm like, okay, I need to recalibrate. So I don't know if that's
Mhm.
something that you find, but I feel like it's a
Yeah.
lifelong pursuit and something that you're never going to nail perfectly as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and I've talked to my, membership site a lot about this. I was really into yoga at one point, and I was horrible at it. I was never good at it, but I had a desire. And one of the things that I loved when I would go in there is they would say, "Welcome to yoga practice." And it didn't matter at what level you showed up, everybody in that room. Some of these women, I'm using the yoga blocks because I can't touch my toes. These women are just like doing the craziest maneuvers. Like, how does your body contort that way? But yet we all showed up that day for yoga practice. And that was something that like resonated with me that I've got to take that into life. There's no making it. There's no getting there. It's always practice. Just like you said, Jeff, we've spent years and years in the gym, and yet we still go back and forth between this, like maybe get a little sloppy sometimes, maybe rein it in. And I think that at the end of the day, we're all just showing up for bodybuilding practice. So that's
Yep.
what we're doing.
Yep. Practice. No, that's a great way to look at it. I think it also takes a lot of pressure off of some of this stuff too. And I think you can apply that to nutrition as well. Just take some of that pressure off of all this. Cause I do think that at the end of the day, it's great. We have all this information and we can learn all this stuff, but sometimes it does put a lot of pressure on to feel like you need to be perfect with everything. And that sometimes can hold people back. So I always try to tell people none of this is sudden death over time. You don't need to nail it down perfectly right away. Just keep moving forward and keep getting better. And that's going to be the most important thing here with this. Is there anything else from a failure standpoint that you want to touch on that maybe we didn't hit on or anything like that?
No, I feel like we nailed that one too
Yeah.
well.
I think again, it's you want to walk that fine line of it, but everyone's going to be in a different spot. But at the end of the day, you do want to push your training and make sure it's getting tougher over time. But you also don't want to fall too far away where you're super far away from failure either. Cool, Lindsay. Like I said, I knew that we weren't going to get to many of the topics. Is there anything on your end that's going to be coming up that you want to share with the audience or anything like that?
The only thing I can think of is I just barely launched, like, with my training app, what I feel like most people struggle with is they're like, the training, they love getting in, they love working hard, but for anybody who struggles with the nutrition, which I feel like is everybody, I decided that with my training app, I was gonna pair, like, meal plans and recipes, and so that was something new that I just barely started last month that I'm so thrilled about it, the feedback that I'm getting and everything. So if that's something that people struggle with, then which I feel like food is, right? It is the struggle. So
Mhm.
training is fun. Food is the struggle for most people. Just that's something that I can definitely help you out with, show you that how it can be a lifestyle and not you don't have to live in constant restraint and restriction so that life is miserable. Like fitness should actually enhance your life and make it like more enjoyable and better. It shouldn't make it miserable. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, no, I agree. Like you said, training's fun. The nutrition's the one where people are like, oh, that sucks. And it does. But I do think it does come down to, like you just said there, people are in this like very restrictive mindset around food, and that makes it a lot less fun than what it can be. No, that's awesome. I think pairing those things are super important. I'm sure you get asked this too. It's what's more important, training or nutrition? It's, man, that's just like such a hard thing to answer, right? It's, yeah, you need the training, but nutrition's important too. As always, you can't really give them like a straight answer. It's both are important.
Yeah, they really are. And it also depends on your goals too, right? Some people just want to maintain. And so it's just go in and have fun, do whatever. Like you don't need a training program. You just want to maintain. You're just doing this to enjoy it. Just go in and do. I don't care what you're doing. Like I don't care if you're doing Bosu ball squats, just whatever, right?
Just be
Um,
careful.
just be careful. But yeah, I don't care. So for that person, it's going to be just keeping overall movement and it is going to be the food that's going to be critical, right? But for people who are body recomp, those both need to just pair up just right. Otherwise, people are like, I don't get it. Why aren't I seeing changes? And for you, it's like it is going to be a lot of that training and nutrition that just work hand in hand. But yeah, so
I
I guess
like
it just depends.
Yeah, no, I like that you bring that up. Goals are super important, right? With that too, that you need to take that into consideration. It's not just one is more important than the other. Again, it's very goal dependent, like you said. So cool, Lindsay. Appreciate your time. Is there anywhere where you want to lead the audience to, or where they can find you, or anything like that?
Just liftinglindsay.com, or well, not even liftinglindsay.com, but just lifting Lindsay on Instagram is a good place to find me. So,
And you'll find everything else that you need just by going there. Yeah, again, appreciate your time, Lindsay. We'll have to get you back on again in the future. And yep, we'll talk to you soon.
okay, thank you.